Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this session of the Book Talk, session 2, discussing historical materialism by Viktor Afanasyev, even though different people pronounce his name differently. But the point is, we're discussing historical materialism, the second part this morning. Before I turn the mic over to our presenter today, I'd like to remind everyone of upcoming activities. On January 6th, we will have a book talk on Bertil Oman's Alienation, Marxist Conception of Man in Capitalist Society. That should be a very interesting activity, Monday, January 6th at 7 p.m. Eastern. And then running from January 21st through February 15th, we will have the National Marxist School online, and there will be various classes offered through that setting. So we encourage you, if you have not already received the notice about the 2025 National Marxist School online, please go to CPUSA.org and sign up for the newsletter there. So without any, and if there are classes you'd like to see or books you'd like to have discussed, please email us at dee@cpusa.org, and we will see what we can do relative to satisfying your requests. We can't satisfy all requests, but at least we can take your thinking, your suggestions into serious consideration as we move forward together without surrendering 1 inch. All right, so with no more delay, I'll turn the mic over to our presenter this morning, Danielle. You have the mic, Danielle.
Cool, thank you, Dee. Welcome, everyone. My name is Danielle, and this is a part 2 to a presentation I gave last month on this same book, Historical Materialism by Viktor Afanasyev. And I don't expect we have the same crowd here today, so just another quick introduction. My name, like I said, is Danielle. I live and work in Detroit, Michigan. I studied art history, but during the pandemic, the only reliable work I found was with a technology consulting firm, and I've been there ever since. I am also a member of the Detroit club CPUSA, and I had the opportunity to read this book and present on it, and I was really excited to do so. So let's get into it. Also, a quick introduction to the author. Viktor Afanasyev was a Russian writer who was prolific between the 1960s and 80s in the USSR, a period during which he wrote more than 20 books, and he helped make Marxist education more accessible. I think this book is a really great example of that. It's really straightforward. He covers a number of different terms and concepts to help the reader really understand historical materialism. And he also wrote a lot in history, philosophy, the economy, and he was the editor-in-chief of Pravda, which was kind of the newspaper of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. He also served in the Soviet legislature and later on also served in parliament. So that's kind of the expertise we have with us here in this book. So a quick review, we won't go through everything in depth, but just to kind of ground ourselves in what we covered last time. I'm going to go over some of the key concepts from the last session. So what is historical materialism? It is the history, well, this is a quote from the Communist Manifesto from Marx and Engels, but we can think of it as the first line of the Communist Manifesto, which is the history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles. So historical materialism itself is this sort of scientific approach to analyzing and understanding the growth of humankind, with the main principle being the mode of production defining the course of development of society in all human history. And so the ways in which wealth is distributed and society is divided into classes, that's all dependent on what is produced, how it is produced, and how products are exchanged. The final causes of social changes and political revolutions, as historical materialism tells us, those are the drivers of history and are from changes in the modes of production and not the ideas of how society should be. So if anyone is aware of like the Enlightenment period, where there's this concept that idealism and ideas of mankind kind of shape society, we see here historical materialism tells us it's the modes of production and the material conditions of things that shape society. And so also at the crux of historical materialism is the concept of the socioeconomic formation. So the socioeconomic formation is the totality of social phenomena and processes which, relate to the economy, ideology, family, way of life, etc., based on a historically determined mode of production. So society develops through the natural replacement of one socioeconomic formation by another more improved. So again, we're not going to get super in depth. We talked about this in our last session, and it's also on YouTube. So if you want to catch up, you can view that video. But also last session, we looked at the transition into capitalism and then what it would look like from capitalism to socialism. We talked about how under capitalism, the capitalist class is the ruling class and they dominate every sphere of society, from art and culture. Last session, we actually looked at art and that was a lot of fun, to politics and governance. The growth of the working class resistance expedited the growth of bourgeois ideas and institutions. That's what we have seen throughout capitalism. It's what we see today. And with that, alongside the reactionary domestic and foreign policy of the ruling class, the state machinery, including the armed forces and other instruments of coercion and suppression, those have also grown. And that's where we look a bit into what imperialism is, which is known to be the highest stage of capitalism. So essentially, we covered all these different concepts, and in the book, Afanasyev covers even more and a lot more in depth. But the main takeaway, here's kind of a little snippet on what socialism is. The main takeaway is that the working people are the real makers of history. We saw that in all the different examples we covered. And so for the part 2 today that we're going to be talking about is, well, what does the path forward look like? So this book doesn't give us a direct answer to the path forward, clearly, since it can't predict the future, but it does give us a foundational understanding of historical materialism and even the science of Marxism-Leninism to be able to apply to our analysis of how we should move forward. So what we see today is essentially the contradiction between those who produce and those who own the means of production is becoming increasingly stark and more apparent. What that contradiction is essentially is the increase in production and surplus, profiting the few, the ruling class, and then the working class not seeing, seeing their conditions more stagnant. Those who produce aren't really benefiting from the fruits of their labor in the same way that those who own are. So, the most compelling embodiment of such a contradiction also is, I think, in our elections. Well, I don't want to kind of walk away without addressing the elections, but the elections in the past decade and the momentum of the far right, emboldened by the MAGA movement, which has many layers of the working class and those most oppressed are struggling against that movement. So in the past decade, we've seen the attack on reproductive rights. We've seen an increase in mass shootings, stagnant wages amongst increasing inflation. We've seen major anti-unionization campaigns. But with all of that, we've also seen people fight to maintain their reproductive rights within their states. We've seen workers win against anti-worker policies, such as the right to work in Michigan. And we've seen a revitalized spirit in the labor movement. And we see a general momentum among the people gaining pace as we speak. So everywhere from the shop floors and union halls to tenants unions and community organizations, this momentum is what bonds the working class together in our broader struggle for a better world. And as we see the struggle to live intensify each day, so too do we see the resistance of the working people increase. So kind of bring us back to Afanasyev's book. He introduces the concept of a revolutionary situation to bring about a social revolution. And so the revolutionary situation comes about with the following. The first, he has 3 points here. And the first is a contradiction between the progressive forces and the forces which seek to maintain the pre-existing socioeconomic formation, causing a sort of unrest. Lenin said so himself, that revolution is impossible without a nationwide crisis. I think that in today, contemporary times, we see that very strikingly among, after the elections and current unionization campaigns, anti-unionization campaigns, and so forth. The second point that Afanasyev covers is the aggravation and suffering of the oppressed, and so unrest due to those things, due to the suffering of the exploited and the oppressed. On this point, I do want to note that this is not to say that we need added oppression or suffering on top of what capitalism already presents to us. This isn't, these points, all these points aren't a sort of formula that we put together to bring about a revolutionary situation. This is just what history has told us has brought about revolutionary situations in the past. And as we see that sort of suffering and oppression come about from capitalism, we see an increased unrest, and that is kind of what drives people to organize. And so also organize activity of the people. And so these are 3 points that Afanasyev covers in his book as well. But social revolutions don't happen overnight or within weeks, nor within a year or two. Even, and I think I'm going to cover later some of the union drives that are happening or strikes that are coming about right now. And even those strikes alone did not happen overnight. A lot of these issues and labor-related struggles have come about from years or months of struggling against the bosses in this way. And so social revolutions don't happen overnight. They happen over the course of long-term resistance, struggle, and deliberate organizing of the working class. And this momentum, the working class's resistance to oppression and exploitation by the capitalist class, this is what tells us. So here I have the contradiction, increased production and surplus, but again, we don't see the fruits of our labor as the producers. So as conditions worsen from everywhere from Amazon warehouse workers having to increase their productivity and being tracked by ankle bracelets or other sorts of mechanisms, as that sort of exploitation and monitoring of how we are producing wealth for the owning class increases, so does the working class resistance increase. And it's that resistance and that sort of will to fight for our working and living conditions tells us that fascism is not inevitable, amongst other things. And so even today, with the face of the MAGA movement, Donald Trump taking the presidency in January, and billionaires like Elon Musk taking on a major role in our government, all the while working people are facing everything from evictions, union busting, and attack on their most basic rights, and harassment by the police. Fascism will only guarantee these things get worse, but it's not inevitable. And I wanted to walk through a few examples. One major example movement is that trade union movement, which trade unions are one of the types of organizations putting themselves at the forefront of the struggle to resist the rule of monopoly capitalism. And so unions are these sorts of embodiments of the working class because they are organized by the spirit of the working class, reaching all corners of it, for migrants, youth, mothers, veterans, and many more. So I want to take a look at some examples. So the UAW is one of the major unions that has been taking a stand in many different, I guess you could say, issues that affect the working class. And recently they have the solidarity campaign against billionaire rule. I do have a QR code at the bottom right if people would like to check out their website, where they are gathering information, names from the vast majority or vast, corners of the working class to essentially get out their messages and connect people together. And some of the main demands they have, or some of the main claims they make, is that Americans want pro-worker politics. They say that the vast majority of Democrats, Republicans, independents want to vote for policies and candidates that think they will benefit regular working Americans. Another demand, or rather statement that they have, is that as a united working class, there's this emphasis on unity. We have the power to win anything and everything. And finally, they say, if you're ready to stand up to the billionaires, we're ready to stand with you. So they are taking this strong, broad approach to standing against the billionaires, and that's something that we've seen them launch before the 2024 election, and they are continuing to do it after the results as well. So I encourage people to check that out, because it's been something really interesting watching Sean Fain discuss those things. And then I have a couple People's World articles I want to highlight here. So this one is Labor Militancy Erupts in New York in Run-Up to the Holidays. And what this covers is on the strikes happening among Amazon workers and flight attendants. On December 19th, specifically for Amazon, the Teamsters called for a strike against the big retailer during their busiest season. And the statement from the Teamsters is that the nationwide action follows Amazon's repeated refusal to follow the law and bargain with thousands of Amazon workers who organized with the Teamsters. So the strike kicked off with a total of 7 facilities, and others across the country are also joining in. I know in Metro Detroit, we have a few facilities, and I think in broader Michigan region, we have a few facilities that are looking to join in as well. And this is really a historic strike. In a recent post from the Teamsters, it comes amid worsening living conditions of the Amazon workers, and they brought out a few stats. So for example, 56% of workers haven't been able to pay their bills, 53% experience food insecurity, and 48% experience housing insecurity. And then also in the same article, it's covered that the flight attendants with United Airlines are also on strike at LaGuardia Airport, which is one of New York's largest and busiest airports. And they've been negotiating a new contract for over 3 years, which is kind of what brings about this strike during a really busy holiday season. The People's World covers a lot of labor organizing and activity like this, and it's a really great resource for keeping up with what's going on. Again, I have the QR code at the bottom right for anyone who kind of wants to look at that. And then my next example is also from the People's World, but there's information about this also from the unions themselves. So in solidarity with the striking workers from Amazon, we also see striking workers from Starbucks looking to get better contract deals. And here we have, let me just read this. After a 98%, 2% strike authorization vote several days before, 10,000 Starbucks workers nationwide struck the coffee chain giant on the morning of December 20th. The strike will run through Christmas Eve. So this is also a really huge strike amid underpaid, overworked, stressed out, and exploited workers. So all this trade union activity can't be left to itself. Again, I encourage you to keep up with what's going on with that activity via the People's World or the unions themselves. But also in the People's World, you'll also see some of the other types of activity going across community organizations, environmental organizations, and so forth, because that trade union activity can't be left to itself. This sort of organizing by the working class needs to come in all forms. I listed some examples of what we have in Detroit. Just to give those concrete examples, we have the Detroit Tenants Association, which was formed by predominantly just tenants in Detroit who wanted to stick up to their big landlords. We have the Detroiters for Tax Justice, which is a multiracial, multi-gender group that is trying to fight against the tax captures in Detroit, which are used for big, large development projects in the city. We also have the presence of political parties such as the Communist Party USA. We have youth organizations such as the Young Communist League. DUAL stands for the Detroit Union Education League, so it focuses on labor education. Michigan Peace Council, the Poor People's Campaign, We the People Michigan, and Garage Cultural, which is actually an arts organization. And the reason I list out all these examples is because every issue that affects the working class has a point of, whether it be, I think earlier I spoke with Dee about the term association, or it's just a point of collective action for people to come together and organize around and struggle against. And something like Garage Cultural, which is an arts organization, I think is really interesting because they focus on the use of art in a predominantly Latino community and how to use art to uplift the Latino community and also address some of the issues facing that community. So these are my examples, and I encourage people to think about what examples they see and where the working class is organizing or that they can also organize. And in the book, Afanasyev really homes in on the point that the working class is ready to resist. His final conclusion in the book is mankind has discerned the real image of capitalism and does not want and will not tolerate its further existence. Moribund capitalism will be replaced by the new and most just society, which is communism. Such is the objective law of social development, and such is the objective dialectics of history. And his conclusion also homes in on the below point, which is that the working class, armed with the science of Marxism, will lead the social revolution for socialism. So what is Marxism-Leninism? Afanasyev covers this a lot towards the end of his book, and how this is something for the working class to be armed with. But first, and I'm not going to go in depth on exactly what Marxism-Leninism is, but a very broad kind of understanding of it is that Marxism-Leninism derives the concepts of Marx and Engels, who brought us scientific socialism, historical materialism, dialectical materialism, and brings those together with the concepts developed by Lenin, or rather expanded upon by Lenin, such as imperialism being the highest stage of capitalism, socialist social revolution, and the role of the media, and so forth. If you do want details around exactly Marxism-Leninism analyses, thinking, approaches, I encourage everyone to register for the National Marxist School online, which starts January 21st. It'll go through until February, covering a variety of topics, starting with the political economy, and it will also cover historical materialism. But where does this fit into our everyday lives and how we think about politics, how we think about media, and how we think about art, including how we think about coalition building and how we approach coalition building? Comes the concept. So Marxist-Leninist philosophy is the sole scientific theory and method of recognizing and explaining reality. It proves beyond all doubt that by its very inexplorably moves forward from the lower to the higher, from the old to the new, presenting as it does a true picture of the world and disclosing the more general laws of development of nature and society. Marxist-Leninist philosophy is a mighty instrument of revolutionary action. So for us in our everyday lives, we have a concept called the Communist Plus, introduced by Communist Party leaders Gus Hall and Henry Winston. So the working class is a multiracial, multi-gender, multi-generational, and it expands across a multitude of histories and backgrounds. And so the Communist Plus is our attempt to understand how the ruling class seeks to cause division and how, this isn't covered by the book, but is a key component to how we organize today as communists. So it was a term coined, like I said, by Gus Hall and Henry Winston, and it carries on Lenin's idea of conscious socialist intervention. It is the unique thing that Marxist-Leninists bring to all struggles, and this is the Communist Party USA's cornerstone for organizing and coalition building and ensuring that we work towards a united working class. So with a class analysis and an understanding of our issues as rooted in a system of economic exploitation, we bring this sort of analysis to issues on gender, issues on sexual orientation, race, the environment, and so forth. So these are interconnected by that sort of root cause, and it's the communist job to bring this analysis into their organizing spaces and while coalition building to help guide a working class centered approach to the people's fight against these issues. It's also a way for us to interconnect these issues and make apparent that interconnection. So for example, some of the organizations I mentioned earlier, such as the Michigan Peace Council, the Poor People's Campaign, the Detroit Union Education League, there have been points of intersections for these organizations to work together. The Detroit Union Education League has done panel discussions before with the Michigan Peace Council to talk about labor's role in fighting for peace, and specifically with regards to the genocide in Palestine happening. So the Communist Plus ensures that unity, and it's in a constant struggle amongst separate organizations to bring together that sort of coalition or interconnected struggle. Because it is only with the unified working class that the capitalist class can be defeated. So not only in organizing and coalition building, but also everywhere in everything we do, whether it's in the workplace or in creating and art making or in our education, that's a sort of communist plus that we want to bring to our everyday sphere. And it always connects issues back to the socialist goal and center that goal in our analyses. So I'd be very curious to hear some examples of where people see the Communist Plus being brought in, where they bring the Communist Plus in to their workspaces or organizing spaces or among other social groups. And I think, Dee, now we can take comments and questions.
Okay, thank you, Danielle. The floor is now open for comments and questions. Unfortunately, we will not be able to read whatever you put in the question box. So please feel encouraged to share your thinking verbally. Okay, looking for raised hands. Okay, Jadea.
Hey, hi. I'm out for a little run while I'm listening here, but I heard you say Communist Plus. I've never heard of that. I was wondering if you could kind of explain that a little more. I guess that's my question.
Okay, thank you. Looking for other raised hands. All right, William, your mic is open on our end.
One thing I think people need to consider is what is the press? It's come to my attention over the last few years that people younger than 50 don't read anymore. That all they do is, even students in very prestigious universities are apparently incapable of reading an entire book. And that the most they can read is very short blurbs. And this last presidential campaign apparently went on pretty much on the internet, not through traditional media of any kind. So that is something I think people need to think hard about. How are you going to get to people?
All right, thank you, William. Looking for more raised hands. Michael, your mic is open.
Yes, thank you. Well, I must say, Danielle and Dee, I didn't get a chance last time, but it's very refreshing and illuminating to have Danielle lay forth, dive deep into the subject matter. That's in the past. So I don't know, Dee, if this is an example of Communist Plus, but at a recent meeting of the St. Paul Regional Labor Federation retirees, once again, the Women's March is happening. And the last time it happened in 2018, oh my God, there was 100,000 people in St. Paul. So I just said, well, you know, why don't we support this event and send them some money? They said, sure. So this is maybe not an example of what you're seeking, Daniel, but an example of everything that happens could be an opportunity to organize. And on that time and that day, that's what we did. Back to you, Dee. Thank you.
So Danielle, your question is for, in addition to whatever people might want to say, your question is, what are examples of organizing going on in various areas throughout the country that people are familiar with? And so if you'd like to introduce experiences taking place in your area, please do. Looking again for more raised hands. All right, Danielle, you might want to respond to what was introduced and we can try again.
Yeah, okay. So I think one or two questions kind of got to what is the Communist Plus, and I would like to go over that because I think that the Communist Plus, what we were talking about, you know, all the concepts of historical materialism, dialectical materialism, understanding what was brought to us by Marxism-Leninism, how do we apply that today? The Communist Plus is one way of applying that, and it is what we would say in the Communist Party. It's what the communist brings to the table when we're out doing mass work. So that is what the plus is. And the plus is essentially always bringing that analysis and an understanding of our issues, our working class issues, or whatever issue we are, you know, collectivizing around. So whether it's, for example, there was one organization I mentioned earlier called Detroiters for Tax Justice. If it's an organizing effort around tax justice, or if it's an organizing effort around peace, for example, you know, bringing that analysis and understanding that those issues are rooted in a system of economic exploitation, which is very broad, and using that sort of analysis and understanding to help drive or help bring in an approach to our work in those mass work areas, to work towards more working class unity, to work towards an understanding that the ruling class is putting in a lot of effort to keep the working class divided, but also to keep, you know, the many layers of oppressed peoples divided as well. And so I think one example I can give is I was at a Detroiters for Tax Justice meeting, and the whole issue around you know, tax injustices in Detroit is we have this thing called tax captures, which essentially are tax money that's used to fund the public libraries. It is taken by the Downtown Detroit Development Authority, which is essentially just like a developer's nonprofit organization. They will take some of that money from the taxes that's used to fund public libraries and redirect it to give you know, all sorts of tax incentives, abatements, but also additional funding to large millionaire development projects in the city. And the city of Detroit is the only city which this sort of tax capture initiative is legal. And I'm sorry, Detroit is the only one where it's legal in the entire state of Michigan. So every other, you know, public library system does not face this sort of issue. So in this meeting, there was a lot of discussion about the role of labor. Well, the unions are supporting these development projects because that brings jobs. And then there became a sort of sentiment that was very anti-union and anti, you know, trade unionist. So a lot of disappointment with the workers, part of these unions who were supporting these millionaire development projects because that meant jobs for them. So an example of bringing the Communist Plus in this scenario is actually bridging that gap and, you know, and getting rid of that divide between the community members who feel like the trade unionists are working against them, and actually thinking about how can we work with certain unions, certain locals specifically, or even something like the Detroit Union Education League, which has a lot of reach between some of the unions. How can we work with them to, you know, provide a sort of education to some of the union members, to provide a sort of, you know, front against these multi-million-dollar projects that don't only harm community members, but also harm some of the families who are associated with those unions and so forth. So working towards that unity, working towards that understanding that we all kind of are struggling against the same oppressor. In a sense, that's what the Communist Plus is, and ensuring that we don't have even more of a divide between, or amongst the working class rather. So that's an example of the Communist Plus, and again, it carries on Lenin's idea of a conscious socialist intervention, and it's supposed to be the unique thing that Marxist-Leninists bring to all struggles. So I hope that like helps clarify what the Communist Plus is. It's just coming into any sort of mass work organization, not even going into organizations, but even in your art, where, you know, or in your everyday lives, in your workplaces, in the classroom amongst your peers and so forth. How are you approaching your tasks, your work, and your social interactions with this idea in mind that we are working towards the same goal, and against the same oppressor. So D, I don't know if you want to give more input on the Communist Plus. I know you have a lot of experience with it.
No, thank you very much.
Cool. And then someone did ask about the press, and so I think I don't know if I got the exact question, but I think my one response is that maybe a couple of responses. So we do see like the way that people consume information has changed drastically throughout the past couple of decades. And I think the way that we put out information also needs to change. And so people, I think definitely college students these days have a hard time maybe reading articles and so forth, for example. Or we're just like bombarded with information left, right, center, up, down, all over the place, that it can be hard for people to decipher what's worth looking at, what's trustworthy, and so forth. So it can be complicated to navigate how to consume information, also complicated to navigate how to put out information in that way. But I think one of the things that actually this could also be an example of the Communist Plus is there are some clubs, for example, in the Communist Party, which seek to add in a social interaction with the media that we also distribute. So for example, People's World is an online platform, but we have a club in Michigan, the Washington Club, which actually prints copies of Michigan specific, or, you know, Southeast Michigan specific articles. And then they've distributed to us in the Detroit Club. They distributed among their own members, people in the Metro Detroit Club. They've even sent copies to the west side of the state. And what we've done, at least in the Detroit Club, and I know the plan is for the other clubs, we actually go door knocking with some of these articles, and we engage in conversation around what's going on. Maybe someone doesn't read an entire article, but at least they've had a conversation around it. So I think social interaction is really important. And I think if we're going to talk about the Communist Plus, that's also like one of the examples, is how do we help people engage with issues on top of like the articles that they have, and that we provide to them, and also coverage. I mean, when you cover local stuff, people are more likely going to be engaged with it. And so for us in the Detroit Club of the Communist Party, we see it to be really important to try and cover as much as possible what's going on in Detroit or Southeast Michigan. We have a lot of news around labor coming out of the state and from our area, and that interests people because a lot of people here are part of those efforts or are part of those unions, or they know someone who's part of those unions. And so I think that there is a sort of another level of like work that we have to do to make some of these things personal to people, whether it's an in-person conversation at the workplace or whatnot, sending articles saying, hey, this made me think of you, and so forth. So, but yeah, it's complicated, and I think using all different types of formats also help. YouTube, Instagram Reels, TikTok, and so forth, you know, making information consumable in all sorts of ways. I definitely know there's people who probably have a lot of thoughts on that, so it's a good topic to talk about.
Okay, I do see a few more hands. Okay, Karamo, we're opening your mic.
Hi, I just wanted to ask a question, and I did type it up in the chat. Do you believe anti-communism is the force weakening the AFL-CIO? It seems to be difficult for the unions to stand up to, say, tax capture, which seems to be a way of literally stealing the working class's money for the various public services that they desperately need. Do you think that that's the reason that they don't have the courage to do it?
Okay, thank you. Looking for more raised hands. Ambrosia, your mic is open on our end. I see you wrote a comment.
So yeah, I'm just asking, how does Communist Plus negotiate the problems of the poor in relation to the working class, when I've noticed in many circles, including socialist and communist circles, the working class has internalized the values of the rich and the elite and, you know, like culture by the superstructure to believe a certain type of hierarchy is necessary or else they will lose this stability. How do you guys negotiate that? And do you still believe in a certain type of hierarchy? Such as an example is like, if someone does not want to work, what does Communist Plus do with them? Do they just say, well, like, our priority is to get jobs and they only deserve money if they get jobs and housing? How do you negotiate these complex issues while still maintaining your values?
Thank you, Ambrosia. Looking for more raised hands. This is the last go round. Please be encouraged. Edwin, your mic is open.
I don't know. I missed the first session. I'm glad to hear it's available. I will certainly review that, but just had a question on the use of violence in overcoming a capitalist system, and with the death of Brian Thompson, the CEO, called an act of terrorism. You know, the question of violence seems to be on a lot of people's minds lately. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Thank you, Edwin. Okay. Dan, opening your mic. Your mic is open on our end. There you are, Dan.
Yeah, I was wondering, I have a question about
Speak up,
Russia.
Dan.
I have a question about Russia and their policies. They were a communist country, I think. And so Russia was kind of anti-Semitic. They were, they didn't let people travel too much to Western countries. Is that similar to America not letting people travel to Cuba or to Russia without problems? That's my question. Thank you.
Last run through, looking for more raised hands. Antonio, your mic is open on our end. Open your mic on your end by clicking the picture. There you are.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm still not clear on what the Communist Plus is. Is it a website? Is it a pamphlet, a book? If you could clarify that, please. And also, I was, listening to some of the and looking at some of the slides, and are you saying that the next stage after capitalism is communism? Because I always thought that it would be socialism. So if you can clarify that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonio. Okay, last scroll through for raised hands. Okay, Judea, your mic is open on our end. Please open your mic on your end.
Hi. Yeah, I work in a refrigeration company, and I'm trying to figure out how to kind of radicalize the guys I work with. I've talked with Jim about it, who's on the call here. Just trying to figure out if there's any advice or suggestions for, living in South Dakota. Most people are not really, into this. So that's it. But if we're out of time, no biggie. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And that's it. And you might want to offer your summary as well, Daniel.
Yeah, okay, so a lot of really good questions. We have a few minutes, so I'm gonna try and get through some of the ones I remember here. There was one question about union standing, whether unions are having a hard time standing against tax captors, whether this relates to anti-communism. What I can say is that this is just an example. Unions not really taking a clear stance with the people of Detroit against tax captures. This is really just an example of the divide that the ruling class has created to ensure that they essentially get what they want. And so I don't think it's necessarily explicitly anti-communist, but rather it is it's mixed with many things. It's mixed with a large campaign from the ruling class in Detroit to ensure they have the support of the major unions on their side. It's a mix of misunderstanding amongst workers what this means for them, because a lot of times people would be like, oh, well, I'm not in Detroit. How would this, why would I really care about this? I just come to Detroit to work. I mean, there's a plethora of reasons why there's not the support, but I think because it's a hard struggle. I mean, you're struggling not just against the mayor and the billionaires, Dan Gilbert and the Illiches and so forth in the city of Detroit, but you're also struggling against the entire state of Michigan. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that there is a lot of room for more support from the unions in this struggle. And that's because a lot of the people who are in the struggle are also union members. There are contingents within unions, such as the IBEW, that has a progressive leaning contingent, and that they're the ones who are looking at this and saying no, we can't support things like that because of what it means to the broader working class. But it's really complicated sometimes when labor is involved in these development projects, how the unions and labor organizations interact with the community. And I don't know if that answers the question, but I think it's a little more than just a general anti-communist sentiment, because like I said, sometimes communists are part of the unions, and it's just a broader struggle to keep the working class united. Let's see, there was again the Communist Plus. Someone asked again, what is the Communist Plus? I think the main way to remember the Communist Plus is that it is a concept. It is an approach to our everyday, work that we do, social interactions that we have in organizing. And that approach is essentially to always bring in an analysis of the root cause of the working class struggle, which is this broader system of exploitation that impacts all layers of the oppressed peoples. So it's not really a website, but there are a ton of resources on what the Communist Plus is. I mean, the Communist Party USA carries out the Communist Plus daily in the work that they do. And so that is a good place to start to understand how to incorporate the concept of the Communist Plus in the work that you do. But that's really much all I can say on that. And then with regards to the question about whether socialism or capitalism is supposed to come after, I'm sorry, socialism or communism is supposed to come after capitalism. Again, we did cover that in the last session. So the socioeconomic formations that we see from capitalism, we do transition to socialism, and from socialism to communism. So that is right. I sort of sum it up in this slide here. But again, I think you just need to search on YouTube historical materialism book talk and look for the little picture that has these presentation slides in it, and you'll be able to get more of like that conversation that we had last session about these socioeconomic formations. Yeah, a lot of really good questions. I am at time for the person who asked for advice living in South Dakota. I would recommend that you actually maybe reach out to someone in the CPUSA, because I don't know whether or not there is organizing being done in South Dakota. D, not to give you more work, but maybe you can share what your email is. I think it was just dee@cpusa.org for people who kind of need to find more information about where they can get resources in their local area, or tap into some of the organizations over there. And yeah, I think with regards to a summary, we kind of went through the whole thing. Again, the main takeaway is that working people are the real makers of history. And as communists, we use this concept, the concept of, the science of Marxism-Leninism, and the concept and understanding that working people are the real makers of history, what the contradiction is in capitalism, and using the concept of the communist plus in our everyday struggle and organizing. That is all from me. I'm sorry I couldn't answer every question. Dee, I will pass it on to you if there's any closing remarks you want to make.
Okay, thank you, Danielle. Thank you very much for taking the time to do the work to help us dive deeper with this subject matter. In response to Ambrosia, you put your finger on another aspect of division within the working class that we have to work to deal with. Many people do not see the poor as a part of the working class, but they are. The working class includes from the unemployed, who are the poor, the unemployed, the underemployed, who are also a part of the poor, and a part of our effort is to deepen our understanding that we cannot free ourselves unless we, as the whole of the working class, unless we attend to all of the challenges faced by the different segments of the working class for whatever reason. So that unity within the different segments of the working class, responding to all of the challenges faced by all of the segments of the working class, is another aspect of the Communist Plus that Danielle spoke so well about. So thank you everyone for participating. Please encourage all of your clubs, districts, friends, co-workers, contacts to participate in the National School January 21st through February 15th, where this conversation and other conversations will continue. So thank you very much. Onward together, never surrender. We have an interesting 4 years ahead of us. Let's join together. Let's work with each other. Let's strengthen our ability to solidify the resistance and grow the resistance. Thank you, Danielle. Thank you, everyone, for participating, and have happy holidays. Take a moment to, the joy of resistance is something to celebrate. The joy of resistance is something to celebrate. Thank you, and have a good day and good rest of your week, and happy holidays. Thank you,
everyone.
Danielle.
Thank you. Thanks, Dave.
Bye-bye.